Okay, so this is going to be the recording for the week 4 GoToMeeting. And what we want to do is just focus on, let me actually get the screen sharing going here. There we go. Can you see my screen now, Megan? Should be popping up. Okay, awesome. So we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit for this one, and we're going to be skipping the first part. But the first part for this project, for anyone else that ends up watching this video later on, the first part was going to be kind of all about doing the glass material. There's still a lot of good information in the recorded lecture, and you can kind of just watch that if you're not quite sure how you do it. So we are going to be going into part 2. Now, I've already kind of done a render ahead of time of the project, and this is kind of what mine looks like. It's an IPR, and I kind of stopped it midway through it, but a lot of you will be kind of at this point once you get to part 2. So all the materials are done, the wall's finished, the bottle's kind of finished, and you can see how I've kind of added this label on top of it, and it's really subtle, and it's kind of hard to see because I didn't let the render finish. But there's also these little tiny imperfections in the glass, like finger smudges and little dust particles. Those are all things I kind of talk about in the other video. Now, one thing to kind of note before you get into any of the stuff for the batch renders, like the final renders, make sure that you're pretty happy with all the lights and materials, because once you kind of commit to a batch render and you go into Nuke, it's really difficult to go back unless you start re-rendering everything. So I would try to iron out any last minute fixes, even if it's from the previous week, like problems with the pulley, the shelf's not looking right. Get all of that out of the way first. But once you know you're good and you're happy with the way the render looks, that's when we want to start the second part. And that's kind of where we're starting right now. So what we're sort of looking at is what's called a beauty pass. And a beauty pass, it basically just means it's kind of the render that has everything in it. So this render has lights, materials, textures, everything we've been doing over the last few weeks. But what we want to do is figure out how do we break this image up into smaller pieces, meaning how do I render the lights independently? How do I control a material property? How could I make the glass a different color after it's been rendered? Is it possible to change the metal to a different type of metal? Or maybe if I saw something like the pulley, what if the pulley's texture intensity was too bright or too dark, and you just realized that after you've already rendered it, because maybe your boss or your art director is telling you that you need to change the pulley to make it darker so it feels right, and you don't have the time to re-render it. Well, so there are a bunch of things we can do with these final renders that will allow us to control these different elements in a different software, so we don't necessarily always have to re-render something. Now I'm going to open Nuke, and I kind of want to show you what some of these renders look like, so it sort of makes sense why we're going to be doing a bunch of different things. But I'm going to bring in a few of the example EXR files from the project. So previously, when you guys have been looking at these EXR files, assuming you have a pretty up-to-date operating system, probably most of you are actually noticing that the EXR file opens up in the little Finder preview. You can open it up in Photoshop typically. It opens inside of RenderMan's image tool, but you can see the image. Now, one thing that's going to change is as soon as you start getting to these new batch renders, if you kind of look what's happening even here in Finder, see how the little preview isn't even loading? It's just kind of pinwheeling and not really going anywhere. And something else that's kind of alarming is down here, if you look at the dimensions, this says it's a 1280 by 720, and as soon as I click on this other image, it's saying it's a 0 by 0 pixel render. So that's going to kind of throw some people off, because I know a lot of you are going to try to view this, and you're not going to be able to. This is not a broken image. This is actually correct. It's just the way we're going to be kind of rendering it this week is different. We're not just saving it out of the image tool. And in the process of us creating this render, it kind of throws off the way your operating system views the image. So Finder has no clue what this looks like. But if you drag this into Nuke's node graph, so here it is, you can see it's just a little node appearing in this graph. So this is kind of like the hypershade. And at the top, we have this thing called a viewer. So you can think of this kind of like Maya's render view or RenderMan's image tool. This is kind of where we're going to look at the image. And over here are going to be the properties. So if I were to like double click on that node, you can see how it's loading up this information on what that particular image is. So in this case, you can see this is kind of like a file texture inside of Maya, like a file node. It's basically what this is in Nuke. Now, if I want to view this over here, you'll notice that below it, there's this little node called a viewer. And I want to connect this image into the viewer, and it should appear up here. So there's a couple ways to do it. You can either take the input on the viewer, this little arrow, drag it back to the image you're going to look at, and it'll connect. And I know it doesn't look right quite yet, but it is connecting. You can also drag the arrow down to the viewer to view it. Same thing. Or better yet, you'll notice that this little connection has the number 1, meaning if you just simply click on a node, and like any node you want to view, if you hit the number 1 on your keyboard, that also automatically connects that to the viewer. So they all kind of do the same thing. But the main thing right now is that as soon as you connect that to the viewer and you're looking at it, you can tell something is trying to show up, because you can see it's like there is a resolution in the corner that's saying it's 1280 by 720, but we're getting black. And that's also kind of why it wasn't showing up outside of Nuke. But the key to this is if you click in the top left corner of Nuke's viewer, you'll see that there are not just red, green, blue, and alpha channels. There's a ton of other things that are hidden from the viewer. So you normally can't see these, but because Nuke understands how the EXR file works, it can show you all this hidden information that's kind of buried in the file. So if I click on something called beauty, you'll notice that it looks like the render. So this is a beauty pass, and this is exactly kind of like what we're seeing right now inside the render view. But I have other things I can kind of look at here. It's not just a beauty. We have something called direct specular. You can see this is basically like an image that shows you just the raw reflection information of one of the light sources. So this is how the key light is reacting with the materials, like how it's reflecting off them. I have indirect diffuse. This one's really dark, but this is going to be your bounced light. And I've got direct diffuse. This is just the direct illumination. And you'll notice that the direct diffuse does look a little weird because you're not seeing any reflections in this one. The glass isn't transparent. But if I went to the transmissive pass, like there's the transparency information. So everything is like that was in this image is just being broken up into these different sections. So direct diffuse, direct specular, indirect diffuse, indirect specular, and transmissive, like all those collectively together are equaling the beauty. So this is the full image. These are the pieces that make up that image. So those are all material properties. Now we also have a few other things like alphas. So this is one of them. So I'm making these alphas for each object, or at least for these 4 different objects. And you can kind of customize this to do alphas for really whatever thing you want. But these are going to be useful because if I use those properly, what I could do is like on one of these renders, I could maybe take the alpha for like the metal and then color correct those metal pieces to be a different color or a different type of metal. And I could do the same thing with really any object in here. Because if you kind of think about it, let's say we didn't have a tool that would make these alphas for us, you'd have to bring this in Photoshop and you're like hand tracing around objects with like a lasso trying to make an alpha. And then you have to do that every frame if it's a moving camera. This kind of alleviates all that. and it really just gives us this very, very accurate alpha for anything we want, so we could potentially change those in Nuke or in After Effects. But that's basically kind of what we're looking at and sort of why we're going to break this stuff up. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. But if you have any questions as I'm kind of going through it, just feel free to type it in there, and I'll try to answer it as we go along. So how do I make these renders? That's really the first part here. Or sorry, that's going to be part 2. But back inside of Maya, I'm currently starting with this. So I have all the materials done, and I'm going to hop into this button right here called the Render Setup window. Okay, and probably most people up to this point have really never been in here, or if you've been in the Render Setup window, it's probably been by mistake because you've clicked this button thinking it was the render settings, because they do look very, very similar. But this is completely different. What the Render Setup window is going to do is this allows us to basically make these new versions of the scene where I can start turning things on and off. So I could maybe do like a version of the scene where only the key light's visible, or I can do another version of the scene where maybe all like the pulley, scraper, bottle, and the metal are hidden. So it's only doing a render of the books, the wall, and the shelf. Because maybe for some reason I want to have those objects rendered independently for more control or whatever reason. So I can kind of break stuff up and kind of be very creative to make these different renders. Now currently what we start with is this thing called the scene layer. And the scene layer has kind of been here the whole time. You probably just didn't know it. The scene is everything currently in your Maya project. So every texture, light, material you've made is on the scene layer. Now what we want to do is make a new layer and then start controlling what is going to be visible. So this button right here with the little plus symbol created a render layer. We're going to hit it, and you can see it makes a new line called Render Setup Layer 1. Nothing's really on it yet, but I'm going to double click to rename it, and I'm going to call this Key Light Layer. So eventually when we kind of get it finished, this layer is hopefully going to be a render that looks only like the key light's contribution to the scene. So the fill light and the dome light should not be visible on this particular render. Now, how do I really know what the layer is doing? Because you can see if I kind of click back and forth, it doesn't seem like anything's changing in the viewer, right? Nothing's really happening. So what you have to do is this little button to the right where it has a little eyeball called Set Layer is Visible. And they have another one down here. You can only be on one layer at a time, and we're currently still on the scene layer. We want to go to this guy. So if you hit the visibility on this one, you'll see that the whole viewport changes. And now we have to kind of make a note of what is carrying over to the new layer. This is going to change depending on what renderer you end up using. So in the future, if you end up using Arnold, or you find like a version of Mental Ray or V-Ray, just keep an eye on this because each renderer will kind of do slightly different things when you make a new render layer. So for example, with RenderMan, when I made the new render layer, you can see that all the geometry is disappearing, and that's totally fine. But we will notice that all the lights are not disappearing. The lights are carrying over into the new layer. So we know that all the lights are currently visible. Our big problem though is we need to get those objects back in there, because if I was on this layer and I did a render, we're not really going to see anything, right? Because there's no objects to show up in the image. The only thing that might appear is like this dome light as a background. So how do I add new objects to this layer? What you're going to do is you right click on the layer, you're going to pick Create Collection, and you can see how that makes this little line that's kind of below the key light layer. You can see how you can collapse that. So we can add a bunch of different collections in here, and eventually when we're done, we'll just minimize it. But a collection, you can kind of think of it like a container or like a group. It's basically this empty node that wants you to add things into it. So as soon as you add something to the collection, it will appear on this layer. So the big one for me is getting the objects. Now to select all the objects, I could go back to the scene layer and I could, hand click on everything one by one, and eventually it would be fine. But to be a little bit faster than doing it that way, I'm going to go into the outliner. Now what I've been doing is I've been trying to keep all the objects named properly and they're kind of already grouped. So I'm going to take all these guys, the scraper, spacer, all the washers, just kind of everything in here. Those are all my objects. And then over here, when I click on that collection line, you can see on the right we have some options. I want to pick add. So I'm going to add those objects to this collection. And when I hit it, you can see it populated this huge list of all the different geometry pieces. And in the viewer, everything has now appeared. So when I go back and forth between the layers this time, because I finally have the objects visible and added to that collection, they're now going to appear in the render. So I'm not really going to waste our time rendering this thing. But if I were to render it, we would probably notice that this render looks really similar to the master layer. So what we're going to do after this is we need to kind of figure out how I turn this new layer to only one of the light sources. So to do that, we are going to add some of the lights to this. And I know they're already visible, but the reason I want to add lights to a new collection is because you can see like to the side of the collection is this little disable button. And if I hit it, see how that kind of like turns off that little group? So whatever you put in it, you can kind of turn on and off on that layer. That's going to be really helpful because now what I could do is I could make a collection for each light individually. And then if I don't want a light visible on the layer, I just simply hit the little disable button and it's going to go away. So real quick, what I'm going to do is go to collection 1 and rename this to Geo Collection. So this is going to be just like the collection for all the objects. I'm going to click up on the layer again, right click, create collection. And I'm just going to really quickly do that 3 times because I have 3 different lights. And obviously when you guys start doing something like this for like a personal project, you just want to think about how you think you'd need to break up the lights. Do you want to put all your skylights, like maybe you have a bunch of area lights outside the windows? Do you want all of them grouped together? Do you need to break those up independently? Do you want to have the sunlight on its own layer, a light bulb? That's all something you're going to kind of figure out later on. But I'm going to do all 3 lights. So let's quickly call this key light collection, fill light collection, and dome light collection. So they're currently all empty. So my next step is going to be adding the appropriate light to the collection. So we'll start with the key light. Okay, just click it, which is actually right here. Remember this guy right here is the cookie filter, like the little weird tree shadow thing we were doing back in the first week. That guy doesn't matter, so you don't have to worry about adding or removing that. This is kind of like connected to the key light, so as long as we handle the key light properly, this will just sort of naturally work. So click it, go to the key light, add that to the collection. You can see it adds that to the group. Go to the fill light and click on the fill light in the scene, add it, and we're going to go to the dome light and do the same thing. Go here, add that. Oh yeah, no worries, Megan. Yeah, I thought I saw you kind of pop in and out there for a second. Did you miss any of that? I'm not sure if you kind of have a giant chunk that you didn't catch. All I did is basically added these little empty collections and started throwing lights in it. Did you see the part with the objects, like putting all the geometry in a collection? Okay, so this, what the collection is, I'll just kind of back up just a little bit. What I did is initially when I made this new layer, there was a blank collection, and let me actually turn this off. When we went to the layer, nothing was really showing up. It was kind of like completely empty. It actually looked like that. So what I did is I made a new collection, and collection is like a container, and I selected all my objects, added them to the collection with that button, and that is what caused them to appear on the new layer, because all the geometry wasn't visible until I made this. And it was kind of the same thing for these guys. I made a collection for each light separately, and I'm just clicking on the light and then adding it to that collection. So yeah, I mean, basically, like what you should notice, when you eventually get to this point on the project, is it'll work. And if you just kind of click on the little disable button, you should notice that the geo collection disables geometry. The key light collection turns off the key light, the fill light disappears, and then the dome light has also disappeared. So they're all like different collections that gives you the ability to turn them on and off as needed. But the nice thing about this is, you know how before, if you wanted to like turn off a light, you actually have to go in there and physically hide it, and then you have to remember to unhide it again later on whenever you want to see it again. This is different because since this is a completely different layer, let's just pretend this layer you want to render with, I don't know, only the dome light. So only this guy is visible, and this little cookie filter doesn't matter. If I hop back to the scene layer, you can see how the original lights are not any different. Like, they're still there. So these are completely different renders, and I can go back and forth and view them, in any way I want. So if you want to look at the whole scene, go here. If you want to see a render with just the dome light, go to that guy. And it's all kind of automated. So once you set it up, it just kind of works. It's pretty cool stuff. So sometimes what I'll do, because this is such like a powerful trick, when you're doing lighting, occasionally you just want to like preview like individual little sections of the scene, and you don't want to keep hiding things constantly or disabling lights. What I've kind of done now is I've put render layers in my just normal workflow, and I'll make them just to like control different parts of the scene's visibility. So I never have to like hide and show things constantly. I just go between different render layers and it does it automatically. So cool stuff. But again, back to kind of what we're doing here. I want to get this to be only the key light. So obviously the thing would be turning off the fill and the dome. So this is the only one visible. So I'm going to click on the fill light disable button. You can see it was back here. It's no longer there. Go to the dome light, disable. So only the key light is visible. And again, this little cookie shadow thing doesn't really matter. That just kind of works as long as the key light is working. So from here, we want to make sure that the layer looks correct. We want to verify it's doing what I think it's doing. So make sure you're on the key light layer, like make sure it's visible, and then just try doing a new render. It's going to be a little slow because I'm doing like a recording, but let's just see what the new render looks like. And what I think you might want to do is when you're rendering this, compare it to the other render you did before, like when you still had all the lights, because this will make it a lot easier for you to actually tell if it's doing the right thing. And eventually this will kind of kick on. It's still trying to probably triangulate the objects. There we go. So I don't need to wait for the thing to be finished. I'll just let it do maybe one more pass of samples, and then we'll cancel it. And you can tell it's definitely a little different because it doesn't seem quite as bright. So something is definitely changing. Yep, this is incredibly slow. Actually, you know what? Let me close out a nuke for a second. This is probably not helping. We'll come back to that nuke. Okay, that's good. We'll hit escape. All right, so I'm just kind of canceling out of that. I already have enough information here. So if I click between the two, here's the first one. Now I know this is grainy, but aside from that, if you just look at the image, you can tell that that fill color over there is disappearing. And then it's a little more subtle, but on the front part of the book, you can see all those reflections are not there. Notice how that part of the pulley is darker. That's probably the dome light. Yeah, I have way too many things open, like Nuke, the QuickTime recording, Maya, the image tool with RenderMan, the GoToMeeting. It's ridiculous. But yeah, this looks correct. Like, I feel pretty confident that that is just a key light. Like, it looks correct. So as soon as you kind of get one layer working, you're kind of good, and then you can start moving on to the next part. So let me save this real quick, because we're kind of good up to this point. Let's go. Okay, there we go. So I got that saved. Now I want to do this again for the fill and the dome light, but since we've already done like a really good job making sure this works, we don't have to do this from scratch. We can copy and paste the layer to make copies of it really quickly. So to make sure I kind of don't accidentally copy something the wrong way, what I'm going to do is collapse the layer down so I know I'm just clicking the layer, not these guys by mistake. So I'm going to click on the layer, Command C to copy, and then Command V. There's a new one. Okay, Command V again to paste it one more time. So I now have 3 layers total. And these are kind of in italics. I think it just does that to show you it was a copy of something we had before. But let's immediately rename this. So let's call this fill light layer. Double click on this guy, dome light layer. Now, if we start with the fill light, I'm going to click on the little eye so I know that I'm currently viewing it. That's probably the biggest issue, is it's really easy to think you're editing the right layer and you're still viewing like the wrong one, and you might wonder why it doesn't look right. So make sure you are viewing the layer you want to look at. So I want to look at this guy. Now, if I render it, this is going to look exactly like the render I just had a second ago because it's a copy. I haven't changed anything. So what should be different with this one? Obviously, we don't want the key light because we already did that. So I can hit the disable button on the key light. You can see it goes away. And again, don't worry about the little shadow thing. That doesn't matter. But on the fill light, I'm going to now turn off the disable button. And you can see the fill light reappears. So if I click between the 2 layers with my visibility, see how it just looks like the lights are swapping out? So if I do a render now, hopefully on this layer, it should look just like that's the only light source. All right, let's try it out. See if it works. Okay, this one is much, much darker. But you can tell already, that is probably the perfect render. So the key light is clearly off because we lost almost all the illumination. Because, that was our main light source, so I'm not really surprised by that. And the fill light is showing up. So I have that nice little IES profile. You can see how it's reflecting off the glass. Cool little reflection on the books. So I don't see any dome light, because if the dome light was still turned on, this would be much, much brighter. But this is almost completely black where the light's not hitting it. So that one also looks good. We are going to hit escape, and this layer worked. Let's keep on moving. So I'm going to go to the dome light. Click on the visibility. Now the dome light still looks like the key light layer because I haven't changed anything. So just like before, we're going to go into the different collections, turn off that key light. This time I want to put the dome light back on. So now this one's visible. And because I'm on that layer with the visibility, we're going to do another IPR and just make sure it looks like the dome light. And I'm going to say yes. That does look like the dome light. I mean, it's definitely different than the other ones. You can tell it doesn't look the same at all. So we had key, fill, dome. So those all look different. So I'm pretty confident in saying that, yep, those are all working. So I don't really need to kind of let this go. We're good. Hit escape. All the layers are set up properly. So that is going to be one of the first parts for part 2. So you're going to kind of set this up first. You guys have, do you have any questions just kind of about any of those layers in the collection? Okay. Not too bad so far. There's a couple small things that are going to come up in a few minutes that are a little annoying, but this part right here isn't too bad. One thing I do want to mention, even though we didn't run into it, but just for the sake of the recording, I've noticed this little weird problem that's popped up with a couple campus students recently. And I didn't even know this was going to be an issue, but we had a couple students that were having issues where, like, inside of the light collection, when they would disable something, it was almost acting like the light wasn't really responding to it or turning on and off. And if you click on a collection, like I could see that their light was added to it, even though when you're turning the disable button on and off in the viewer, it didn't seem like it was really doing anything. And it turns out the problem was they had some of their lights in a group. So they had taken like the key light and actually grouped it. And in the little name over here, you could see where it said like group 1, like within a little line break, and then Pixar rectangular light next to it. And for whatever reason, RenderMan's lights do not like to be in groups, and they don't work with the render setup window. So I don't know if that's like a RenderMan issue or if that's just a Maya problem. It could just be in 2017, but just kind of keep an eye on that. If you have any light in a group, you may want to just take it out of the group to avoid the potential problem of it not really responding properly. One other thing that's kind of important to mention too is if you ever feel like a collection is broken or it's not responding the way you want, you can always delete it and redo it. And if you want to remove something from a collection, you can click on it and hit remove and then select it and re-add it. So it's really easy to like add and remove things from the collections as you need to. But that's just kind of worth mentioning. All right, so we're kind of good with this for a little bit, and I'll kind of explain what these other buttons do in a few more minutes here, but we'll get out of that section. Yeah, exactly. As long as they're just separate nodes and you don't have them all grouped together, I don't think you're going to run into the problem. Yeah, and I'm still in 2017, so I know some people are going to be using Maya 2018, and if you're in 2018, you might have your stuff grouped and it completely works. I haven't tested it in that one yet. But I know in 17 we did have a few people where the group was breaking the lights. Yeah, I'm not quite there yet. I'm still rocking 17 for as long as possible. Okay, so we got that. Now what that's going to do is give us individual renders of lights. So that's part of it. But remember how in Nuke I was showing us how we also want to have those different passes where like the materials are broken down, like just a specular render, just a direct illumination render, a render for like the glass, like seeing through it. So that's something completely different. That has nothing really to do with the render layers. That is something we need to set up in the render settings. And I know we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about like every single control and setting in here. There's a lot of good information in their help docs, but we are going to go to the passes tab. So the passes tab, this is a work in progress, and there's a really good chance in some newer versions of RenderMan, like down the road a little bit, this whole area is going to completely change. I've been talking to one of the guys that works over there, and he knows that this is a little clunky, and this is like one of their first iterations at this setup inside of Maya. So it's a little weird, it's a little confusing looking, but I'll try to walk you through basically what we're looking at. So what the passes and outputs tab are doing is this is sort of your way to control what channels you get out of a batch render. So if you've never really been in here before, it defaults to having just your typical RGBA channels. So what that would mean is if I hit render, the batch render would have something that looks like that. It would just be a single image of this stuff right here. So that's fine, but that's not really what we're talking about. We want to make passes. Now on the left side, you can see all these weird little like abbreviations and acronyms of like other types of passes we may want to make. And some of these I don't really even know what they do. I haven't experimented with enough of them yet. But if you scroll down a little bit, you'll start seeing some ones that we do want. And these are all listed in the documentation. But we want to do a beauty pass, like there's that guy, direct diffuse, direct specular. So I want to kind of show you like an issue that I ran into when I first tried figuring this thing out. So I knew I wanted a beauty pass. So what I did is I'd click on it, and maybe I'd click on a few other ones I might want, like direct diffuse, direct specular. So I kind of find the passes I think I might need, and then I hit this little arrow over here, and you can see how it just like moves those into the outputs. And this seemed totally fine when I first did it. But what happens is when you hit batch render, I didn't realize at first that every line here in the outputs, so I have 4 different lines, each line is a different image. So this means right now, if I hit batch render, I'm going to get the full color render, another render called beauty that actually just happens to look exactly like the color render because they're kind of the same thing. I'd get another image of direct diffuse information only, another one of just those specular highlights. And that may not seem like that big of a deal, but if you imagine that you had someone telling you that you needed to make, maybe a dozen different passes in here. Okay, and you go through the list, you pick all your passes, you add a dozen different passes on the right side. This means for one of the lights, you're now turning that one image into about 12 images. And that's only for one light. And now you think about that happening again for the second light and the third light. So you're now up to 36 different images for your 3 lights. And that's only going to be for the first frame of your sequence. Because down the road you might want to do an image sequence with like character animation, or if you're doing like a character model, you want like a camera orbiting around the back to show off the anatomy. Now you're doing 36 images every frame, and if you just even do like 100 frames, which is hardly anything, I mean that's only 3 or 4 seconds of work. Now we're into like 36 or 3,600 frames, it quickly escalates into like thousands and thousands of images. And that is not fun to manage. I mean, on top of that, think about your poor hard drive. Your image folder building up with like thousands of files, and you're running out of space, and you're trying to keep them organized. It's really, really difficult to do that. And one of the really big differences here, and kind of why we've been using this EXR format, is EXR files handle this completely different. So what I'm going to do is just remove those little passes by hitting the minus button. And you'll notice we can't remove the RGBA. They're just always there by default, so that's not a big deal. But I don't want all those passes listed individually. What the EXR file will do is, instead of just holding 4 channels like RGBA, because most files do that, it's just RGB or RGBA and that's it. This guy can hold up to 1,024 channels, which is quite impressive. You'll never need 1,000 channels. I mean, I've never seen anyone even come remotely close to that. But because you have so much space and extra room in the EXR file, it means if I do it right, I could take all the passes I want. Like I could probably grab every single pass in the list, add it to this EXR file, and it would still only come out as one image, as opposed to it being, 100. So really the trick with this thing is understanding how do I add them all to the same output and not have them appear individually as different outputs. That's kind of the main thing I'm getting at. So the way to do this the right way is, instead of grabbing from the left side, hit the plus symbol on the right, add a new custom output, a window is going to pop up, and then under the output channels, you're going to right click This is going to bring up like another separate drop down, kind of like a list. These are all the different passes that were showing up over here on the left. And all you need to do is go to the documentation, read through the ones you want. Now, unfortunately, they're not alphabetical, so it's a little weird navigating through it. Some of it's kind of alphabetical because you can see how they've got like capitals over here, and then it kind of goes to underscores, and then it begins going into like lowercase. And it still kind of hops around erratically. Like there's two A's, I don't know why. There's two Z's, no clue. It's a little unorganized, but I'll just kind of go through the list. So we want to do beauty. You can see it takes me out of the window. I'm going to right click again. Direct diffuse. Right click. Indirect diffuse right here. Right click again. Direct specular. Indirect specular. Transmissive. Okay. Now, those guys right there, those are all the material passes. Those are kind of most of the ones I was showing you in Nuke earlier. So that's part of it. Now, on top of that, it's not just material passes. We also want to make those alpha channels so I can control the objects later. So let's right click. And to do alphas, we need to use these mat IDs. Now, you can do up to 8, and I'm pretty sure there are ways to add additional ones, and they're going to be changing this in some future releases of RenderMan. But at the moment, this is kind of only limited to about 8, but I have a feeling we're going to see some changes with that. We only need to do 4 different alphas. So if the number 0 bothers you, you can just do 1, 2, 3, 4. But the way I did it in the lecture recording is I did 0, 1, 2, 3. So there's that one, 1, 2, and 3. So they're in the list. They're just kind of way over here on the front. So those have been added. Now the only one I'm missing, because I almost have them all, is this other one called Z. And Z is one of the weird ones that's in 2 different spots, but these do the exact same thing. So I don't know why it's listed twice, but Z is a depth pass. So you know how like if you saw the letter R, you'd kind of assume that has to do with the red channel, and G is green, B blue, A alpha. Just sort of like U and V have to do with your 2D UV coordinate space. Z is going to be depth. So Z, anytime you see that in compositing packages, it's always saying there's something going on with distance from the camera. But I want to click on Z and add that to the list. You can see that just pops on at the end. Once you got the list set up and you're 100% sure every pass is there, hit create. And you can see this now appears as one line instead of multiple outputs. So this would all be in one image, as opposed to, about 12. So that is getting some of the passes set up. Not too bad. Okay. Now there's one small little issue with this, and it's related to the mat IDs. So you know how I was saying earlier that these mat IDs are kind of your alphas? Well, you have to kind of think at this point, does RenderMan know which object mat ID 0 is referring to? Like I haven't really directed these to like the geometry, so RenderMan has no clue what those mean. So it's almost like I'm making like an empty channel for an alpha, but I still need to tell the software which object is going to be in that channel. So what I'm about to show you is probably going to be the most annoying and slightly difficult part of the entire project. It's not really hard, it's just very tedious, and it just seems like an unnecessary amount of work to get it set up. Because I used to do this before when I was teaching MentalRay, and it was like extremely simple. RenderMan does a lot of really great things. This is just one of those areas in the software where it's really not set up the best way. And I thought I was doing it wrong the whole time I was setting it up, and I found the actual official documentation and video, and this is the way they're doing it, but hopefully they change it. So here we go. How do I connect the objects to the mat ID pass? To do this, we need to go in the hypershade. So I'm going to load up the hypershade. Let's just kind of scale this down a little bit. Now, inside of the hypershade, I don't have it in this scene right now, but I'm sure a lot of students probably have multiple tabs set up, like for each material. What I would do is don't mess up any tabs you currently have where you're editing a material. Make a new tab, and I'll just call this something like Mat ID. So it's like a completely new tab with nothing in it, just so I don't mess anything else up. And what you want to do is add the materials from the objects you want into the graph. So what we want to do is add the scraper, pulley, metal, and bottle. Now for me, when I did it, I actually have the scraper broken up into two different materials. I have one for the handle, one for the blade. Some students may have done that. I'm sure a good chunk of students probably don't have two different materials. It's probably just one. It doesn't really matter, but grab both materials for the scraper if you have two. So there's right here, there they are. I'm going to click on all the materials I want. So those guys, there's the vial. Let's see, where's my metal? I used nickel. And there's the pulley. So there's all the shaders I want. Now I want to add them to the node graph. So once I have the shader selected at the top, hit that button right there with a little plus, add selected nodes to graph, and that will put them all down here. So I'm not adding like the full material network. So I'm not seeing like the texture files and the ramps and the bump 2D nodes, all that stuff. This is really just the root material. That's the only thing we need. The rest of it's going to get way too busy. So we're not going to worry about that. Now what I want to do as well is I kind of want to organize this so it's it's stacked in the order that I want the Mat IDs connected. So Mat ID 0 is supposed to be the scraper. Okay, so there's the handle. Let's move that up. There's the metal. So these are all part of the first Mat ID. That's the first object. Mat ID 1 is going to be the pulley. Oops, okay, whoops. So there's the pulley. Move this out of the way, put that one below it. Then we have the metal. So there's that. And then below that, we have the glass vial. And the glass vial looks a little bit weird because it doesn't have all those exposed parameters. That's just because this material is a Pixar layer. It's not the original Pixar surface. And the layered material just doesn't look quite the same. But this is still totally fine. It's a material. So we've got all these guys in here. And we need to add a custom attribute to the material to help it connect to the render pass. So we're going to start with the handle. We're going to click on it, go load up the attributes over here, and we're going to go to the top where it says attributes, click on it, go down to RenderMan, manage attributes. So this is really similar to what you may have been doing in the previous week. Do you remember when I was doing those color management things on the file nodes? Where in the lecture I kept going to like, on the file, attributes, RenderMan, add texture controls. And it would add all these little custom things at the bottom of the file. Yeah, this is basically the same thing, but we're just doing it on the material. We're adding something new to the material that wasn't there originally. So, manage. Now, this one, it's not like this shows up in a list where I can just say add RenderMan Mat ID. When you go into the manage attributes, this is your way to see all the potential attributes you can add. And I'm pretty sure those texture ones are probably in here somewhere. Maybe not. I don't know if they're here or not. They actually might not be in this one. But these are all things we could add to the material. If you scroll down enough, you'll probably immediately find what we're looking for because we know what these are. We just did those in the render settings. That is what you're looking for. So if the scraper is supposed to be showing up in the Mat ID 0, I want to pick this one. So Mat ID 0, add. You see how it pops over? Close out. And what you're looking for is, it might just take like a second to update, but if you scroll down to the bottom of the material, this RenderMan section has now been added to it. It wasn't here before. Open it up, go down, and we have this little simple Mat ID 0 slider. Take it, slide it over to white. Okay, and this just means like what color do you want the alpha to be? And since it's going to be on a black background, we definitely need to give it some type of color, because if we don't, it's going to be like a black alpha against a black background, and you'd never even see it. So I like to keep mine just white. Let's go to the next one, scraper metal. Now this is still part of the scraper, so I kind of want to group those guys together in the alpha, and you'll see how this doesn't have it yet. I know it was kind of like appearing there for a second. That's just like a slight lag with Maya trying to keep up, but I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, add RenderMan attributes, scroll down, and because I want this with the other one, I'm picking the same number, mat ID 0. Add close, and just give it a second. There it is. Go down, make it white. Okay, let's go down a little bit farther. Here's the pulley. So we're going to go to that guy, and now we're just going to move on to the next one. So same thing, manage attributes. This is going to be mat ID 1. Add it over, and let's kind of wait for it to update. There it is. Again, make it white. And I'm just going to do this again for the other ones. Okay, almost done. This is 3, add that one. And down here at the bottom, there it is. Okay, mat ID 3, move that over, and we're done. Okay, so that made the attribute to help to connect it to the passes. Now you'd think at this point we'd be done. Clearly RenderMan would know that that mat ID is going to the mat ID 3 in the render settings. But no, it does not. It needs still more information, and we have to manually connect it to it. Just like how you would, connect things together in the Hypershade, we basically have to do that with RenderMan, connect it to the render pass. So the next step is to make this node in the Hypershade called the Pixar Mat ID node. Now you can just use tab and start typing it in, like PXR mat, and it'll pop up in a list. But I do want to show you kind of where this is located, because I know a lot of people tend to go to this little creation section to find stuff. If you're trying to find it through the creation window, you're going to go to patterns, and then just kind of scroll down. It's all alphabetical. Go down to Pixar Mat ID. There it is. You click it. It's the same thing. So we'll do that. There it is. Pixar Mat ID 1. Now in the Pixar Mat ID, you don't need to change anything on the node. So don't change the AOV. Don't change any of the colors or anything like that. Don't disable it. What we need to do is connect an output from here into the input on the material. So what I'm kind of looking for on the material is I'm trying to see this slider right here on the left side. And you'll notice that it's not really showing up in the list. So where is it? Well, by default, these materials won't show you every single attribute. Now, if you'll kind of remember earlier from like the previous week, I was talking about how these buttons right here, which are also the 1, 2, 3, and 4 keys, they'll kind of hide and show different things. So if I click on the material and do 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see how 3 is much, much longer. Like we have a ton of nodes and attributes in this thing. So this is every single attribute on the material. If I go down far enough, there's the thing I'm looking for at the way bottom. Now I know it's not called, sorry, what's it called here? Mat ID 0. It's called utility pattern. This is actually the same thing as that guy right there. I don't really know why the name's different. So that's what we're looking for. Now, because this is such a long node and it's really annoying to scroll through it just to connect it, what I usually do to make it a little bit faster is when I click on it, I hit 3, click in the little filter box at the top, and type in utility. And what that does is it filters out everything that's not named utility, because that's really the only thing I care about. Let me just really quickly do that on all these guys. So 3, go in there, utility, and let's do that again. Okay, let's grab these guys, move them up. Okay, that's kind of, at least we have the attribute exposed to make the connection. So I'm hitting 3, yeah, on my keyboard, and what 3 is doing, that was making the node kind of go to that really long list of like every attribute. So that was exposing all the attributes, hitting 3. And then I click in the little text box to type, and I type in utility after I've hit 3, and that will filter out all the attributes that don't have this name in it or this word in it. So hit 3 first, then type in utility in the little search box. That is kind of, if I had it in 4, I don't think it would even show up. Yeah, you can see how with 4, because I didn't hit 3 previously, it doesn't know that's even on the list, and it won't even show up. Okay, so there's the input. Now the other problem here is just more and more issues. Where's the output, right? Because you know how there should be like a dot on the right side here to connect into it? There's no dots. So you're going to click on this, hit 3, and this is the connection. It's going to be result AOV going into the utility pattern. So when I drag it over, one thing too that kind of makes that is sort of a clue, or that we're kind of doing it right. See how the green color is the same color? It's not that light green we were seeing before with like out color and some of the diffuse connections. This is a darker green. I think this darker green color is related to connections that have to do with the render settings. So when I drag it over, see how it's like not connecting? Could this get any worse? But don't panic. If you kind of hold over it, it'll pop open. It's actually this guy. That's where it connects. It's very strange. But essentially, it's not the original utility pattern. You have to expand it, and you go into utility pattern 0. And as soon as you do that, you kind of noticed how it made this extra line. Because before, there really only is one utility pattern in there. So I don't know exactly what the purpose is of it making a brand new one, but don't worry about that. Just ignore it. You're just connecting this into utility pattern 0. That's it. The other one is completely irrelevant. There might be some reason for it, and I'm sure there is a purpose for having multiple utility patterns. I just don't know what it is. Okay, let's keep going. Go down, do the same thing. I'm just basically repeating this over and over. Cool, I think we got it. So now they're finally connected. You can kind of see why that's one of the more kind of annoying parts of the activity, because all we're trying to do is get an alpha, and it's about a dozen steps to get to that point, like making the attribute, exposing the attribute, making the node to connect it, then connecting it. It's quite a process, but that's kind of currently how you're doing it in RenderMan, and they're well aware of how annoying this process is. So even though at the moment, this is RenderMan, I think 21.6 and 21.7 just came out. I would imagine around like RenderMan 22, they'll probably revamp this whole thing. So this is just a temporary kind of fix. Do you have any questions about that part? All 100 steps. Yeah, exactly. It's just time consuming. It's not really difficult. It's kind of annoying. But as long as you take it slow, do it step by step, it should work. All right, so there's the passes. Um, Now at this point, everything is kind of good. So I'm pretty sure we're finally at the point where we can now hit batch render. So I'm going to get out of here. Now, a couple things we want to do before we do the batch render is the batch render needs to know like what camera you're doing, what's the resolution, your quality, all that stuff. Now, what you want to do is go to the Common tab and make sure these guys are all set the way you want. Now, a couple things to note about this is at the top, look at where the image is going to go. So you're probably going to be setting your project, and you can see that I have mine on my desktop. There's a project called VSD Project Work 2017. Now inside of that My Project directory, there's a RenderMan folder, and in that there's another folder that happens to be named according to my scene file. So there's another folder in that one. And inside of that, there's another folder called Images, and in the Images folder, that's where the render is going to go. So I know it's a little weird because it's like really deep in all these kind of subfolders, but if you're ever kind of curious where it's going, this is generally going to be the path you're looking for. So just kind of read that and look at the name of the file. This is going to be called VSD Project 4 Render Layers GoToMeeting.exr. Now, one little small issue with this is this means that potentially each EXR file is going to be named the same way. So when I render those 3 different lights, they're all going to come out with the same name, which is not good. So what I want to do instead is select this prefix. So select all this stuff. I don't want it to use the scene name. You select it, right click. You're going to pick render layer. And you'll see how by choosing this little render layer option with the little brackets a little greater than and less than symbols, that will change the name to respond to whatever layer you happen to be rendering. Now currently I'm probably still, looks like I'm viewing the dome light layer because that was the last one we set up. So this layer would be called rs underscore dome light layer. And the rs is actually standing for render setup, because it's from the render setup window. So rs dome light layer. But at least now if I went to another layer, like this is me going to the fill light, you'll see how it auto names it to the fill light layer. So it'll name it according to whatever you named the layer in the render setup window. So that's fine. EXR format, perfect. Now some of you may run into a weird issue where it doesn't say OpenEXR in the image format. This is a strange Maya bug. Don't worry. This really doesn't matter because under the passes, this one is what RenderMan is going to use anyway. And you can tell it's defaulting to EXR, so we're good. So even if you happen to be one of the few people where OpenEXR doesn't show up, you're fine. It's still going to work. We do want to do a single frame, but eventually if you do a sequence, for a portfolio project, this is where you change it to a sequence, where you might do name.number.extension, and then you can pick your frame range. And you can see how it's naming the images like keylight layer dot 1, 10. It would kind of number the frames in order automatically. But we want to stick with name.extension, just a single frame. Let's go down. Render cam. Make sure you don't have 2 cameras on here. That kind of happens occasionally where someone will accidentally add another camera. If you see any additional camera in here, like perspective, whatever, a little trash can symbol will appear next to it. Hit the trash can to remove it. So this is the only one that's renderable. The resolution should already be set up, but just double check it. It should be set to the HD 720 preset, which is 1280 by 720. Most of that should just kind of be working because I had the project set up that way from the beginning, but just be careful and double check it. The other thing you want to do is, because we're doing a final batch render, we want to kind of crank up the max samples a little bit. Now, a lot of people probably might have it set to 128 because it typically defaults at 128. There's nothing wrong with that. But usually, because we're kind of doing that final render, you really want to make sure that it's going to look pretty clean. So I'd recommend doing like 256 or maybe even 512 just to kind of bump it up a little bit. It'll take longer, but I'd prefer to get like a super clean render out of here. Yes, there is a trash can by the camera. Yep. So if you see a second camera, just hit the little trash can and that should remove it. So there's only one on the list. Mine didn't have the trash can just because I only have one camera on there. And as soon as you get rid of the second one, you'll see all the little trash can icons disappear. Okay. So eventually I am going to use a higher number, but really remember right now, we haven't even done a batch render. And so I really don't think the first time you hit batch render, you want to be waiting, let's say, 15, 20 minutes for an image that could be broken. Because, it's easy to miss a step here and there. So what I'd recommend you do is just to test them out, don't do the high quality render immediately. Let's knock this down to like 8 samples. And actually for the sake of the GoToMeeting, because my computer is incredibly slow right now, I'm going to do 4 samples. Now the render is going to look terrible. This is really bad quality, but that doesn't matter. All I'm doing is trying to verify that the image works. Do the passes show up? Is it the right light? Is anything missing? Did I forget one of the passes? Is an object hidden? You're just kind of making sure that everything seems to be correct. So 4 samples for now. Now, one other small thing we need to fix, and this is all in the documentation, by the way, is remember back on the passes how I was saying that these are 2 different outputs. So we're going to get 2 images on every render layer, and we have 3 render layers, key, fill, dome. Each layer is going to do 2 images. So we're going to get 6 images total. Now, the one we set up here with all the passes, that's the one I want. I really don't need the color. That's actually why we included that beauty in the list, because I showed you before how beauty is the color. It's the exact same thing. So since we already have this beauty pass in it, which is the full render, I don't need this guy. This is just redundant, and it just adds extra clutter for no reason. So what I would recommend you do is when you get to this point to hit batch render, click on RGBA, turn compute off. On this guy, make sure compute is still turned on. And then the last thing we want to do, before I go back in the render setup window to start this thing, is on the passes, turn off this OpenEXR as RGBA checkbox. This is a little hard to explain why we're going to do this. I don't want to hold you up too much with this, but basically what would happen is if we do not turn this off, the EXR file is going to start dumping these passes in the RGBA channels, because every file has red, green, blue alpha channels, which is actually normally this guy up here. And this means it's going to start taking some of these passes and start throwing them in the color. Now, that may not seem like that big of a deal because it is on by default. But what I noticed happened is when I did this, because I didn't really know what this was even doing, but when I had it on, I noticed that when I viewed my passes in Nuke, it was scrambling up the channels. And I would have things like the beauty is now in the RGB channels, and then it's grabbing the red channel from the diffuse, and it puts that in the alpha channel. So it kind of like does this really weird scrambling issue where the passes aren't really where they're supposed to be, and you'll start noticing strange color problems. One of them's missing a color channel, the alpha's in the wrong spot, or it's named incorrectly. I don't know if that's just a glitch, but it doesn't really matter. If you turn this off, this will prevent RenderMan from trying to throw those passes into the color. Now, the one little caveat to this thing is while this does fix all those strange channel and pass issues, turning this off, this is the reason why the render wasn't showing up in preview. Because since I'm disabling the color channels, and preview thrives off the color, like that's how every other render we've done has worked, so it can't find the color, and it just sits there spinning forever. And because it doesn't see the color channels, it has no clue what the resolution is. It thinks it's a broken file. It isn't. But that's sort of, why it's doing this. So again, looks weird in preview. it'll be fine when you batch render it and bring in a nuke. Okay, I think we're good there. Last thing here is in the render setup window, this is where you need to decide what layers you want to render. Now, this button on the right side, this little director's cut, this is what's determining what's going to be renderable. So any layer that has that turned on, when I hit batch render, it will render the layer. Meaning, I'm going to get 4 different batch renders. And it's going to probably start with the scene and then go down the list. So it's going to take quite a long time. Now, we don't even need the scene. I don't care about that at all. So I'm going to turn this one off. These are really the only ones I really need. And I don't want to wait on 3 of them. Let's just make sure one of them works. So I'm going to turn off this for the other 2. So the only thing that has that button turned on is the key light. And at this point, it doesn't really matter what layer you're visible on. So that's not important. But for the batch render, it does need to know which one of these is set to renderable. So just one. Now, before I kind of hit the batch render, I don't know if it's going to happen to you necessarily, but there's a small group of students that when they hit batch render for the first time, which is right here, by the way, so it's under the RenderMan menu. There it is. When they hit it, you may get an error. And it says, I don't remember what the error is. It's something very vague, like fatal error, render error. It's not very helpful. But you'll notice that the batch render never really starts. It gets stuck almost immediately. If you've noticed that the batch render breaks, there are a few things you want to look into to fix it. The first big one is go into your preferences for Maya. Scroll down to the RenderMan section. Scroll down here, and this is the batch render information. This is kind of where it controls your priority, if you have like multiple machines rendering, how many seconds it'll create interval checkpoints. None of that really matters. The only thing you need to do in here is this environment key for some reason kind of gets mixed up occasionally. I don't know what's causing it to break. I think it might be from someone that had like an older version of RenderMan, but either way, hit reset and that will reset the environment key. Hit save, see if it batch renders. It probably will. Now, if you do that and you notice that it's still erroring out, and it still won't batch render. The other thing you want to look into are potential problems with the lights. And I don't know if you ran into this at all, like earlier in week 3. And I kind of forgot to talk to some of you guys about this. Did you have an issue where, with RenderMan, if you try to do an IPR, the render window would straight up not even open? It would act like you never even clicked a button. You don't get an error or anything. It just doesn't do anything. I don't know if you ran into that. Like the IPR just doesn't do anything at all. It may not have happened. It's kind of like a real hit and miss thing, but one of the kind of problems with RenderMan is it's really particular about files being in the right spot. So like, you know how all your file nodes are looking for a texture and the lights are looking for textures like the little tree shadow thing, the fill light has the IES profile. Normally, if a material can't find a texture, like the material just renders black, you've probably seen that before in shading and lighting. When a light can't find a texture in RenderMan, you would think the light would just not work. But for whatever reason, when the light can't find a texture, it just completely breaks the render. Like it doesn't even try. So make sure your tree shadow is still loading the image. Like if you're not sure if it's working or not, click the folder, manually reload it again, just to verify it is pulling the image. And the other big one is on that fill light, because we were using that little IES profile right here. That also needs to be loading the image. If you see anything weird with the path or it's broken, that could be why the render never started. So just something to kind of be careful about. That'll inevitably pop up at some point if you end up using RenderMan in like a portfolio class. So it's really weird with file path stuff. It hates it when it can't find something. So as long as you set your project, you kind of have good, workflow with that, you shouldn't really experience that issue. But aside from that, let's hit batch render. That only took us like an hour and 20 minutes to set up. A lot of it's because I'm explaining it. The actual process to do this, once you get used to it, this will maybe take you like 10, 15 minutes. But let's try doing a batch. So I'm going to go over here, hit batch render. Okay, let's give it a second. This is not Maya crashing. Don't worry about that. Hit continue. Okay. Now, this window is going to pop up, and you've probably never seen this thing before. This is in RenderMan. You can find it if you go up here and click on it right there. It's just not on the shelf, but the local queue is where you can kind of monitor what the batch render is doing. Now, this is also where you'd know if it errored out, because it wouldn't even be green. It would have stopped already and gone to like a red color, and it would just say error, and it wouldn't be doing anything. But if you click on the job, and the job is you submitting the render, when you click on it, below you'll see there's a bunch of commands that RenderMan's going through. So the command order is, this line was it just starting the render. It took no time at all. The second command, this is it rendering it. This is the one you really want to pay attention to. It's a percentage. So you can kind of watch how long it's going to take. So I'm up to almost a minute, and it's about 40% done. And it's also telling me all the weird warnings and errors that could be going on. And a lot of this doesn't matter. It's just having issues with like Maya nodes, like the Maya bump 2D. It's still fine. It'll render. Eventually, when it gets through it, this, I believe, is it saving the image to the folder, and that is it closing the job and saying it's done. So there's a few steps it goes through, and three of these steps don't take any time at all. It's really just this one that you're kind of pay attention to. And I'm just going to give it just another 30 or so seconds to kind of let it finish, and then I'll show you where the image is going to be. So just give that a little bit of time. This is the fun part, where you watch paint dry. And when you do this, by the way, it's going to be a lot faster than this. This is because my computer has way too many things running at once. I mean, a little 4/8 sample render, you'll probably see it cranks that thing out in about 20 seconds. And it is done. Should be saving it pretty soon. Oh my goodness. Hanging out on the, there we go. Done. You can see there, it's finished, and closing the job, done. So those all went by pretty quick. So what we want to do is verify that this worked. This is where you need Nuke, because you're not going to be able to see this in Finder. So let's kind of close out of this for a second. Don't even need this open at the moment. Let's go to Nuke and preview the render and figure out if it worked. Okay. So I'm going to go to Finder. Now I want to, again, figure out where it was going. So you're going to look in the Common tab of the render settings if you're not sure. But mine is probably going to, I think it's VSD Project Work 2017. It's going to go in the RenderMan folder. Now, if you've never been in the RenderMan folder, this could look a little crazy. Do you use incremental saving? Like, you know how Maya does the auto save thing? Okay. This is going to be fun for you. So when you go in this folder, see how there's all these little weird folders in here, and they're all named differently? These are named according to the scene file. So every single time you've hit render, if your scene name is different, it makes a new folder. Now, This may not seem like a big deal, but when someone's using incremental saving, because Maya renames those files for you so frequently, and you're obviously hitting render a lot, there's a chance the first time you go in here, you are going to be overwhelmed with probably dozens or maybe even hundreds of folders. And it's basically showing you the history of every single time you've hit render, because it's a different scene. Yes, I know, right? Isn't that wonderful? Now, I will say one thing you could do if you're just don't even feel like dealing with the clutter, before you ever hit batch render, if you want, go in the folder, grab all the folders that are not called textures, thumbnails, and untitled. All the ones that look like scene names. So what I would do is remove those guys, right click, put it in the trash, get rid of them. So that way you know when you do hit batch render, the only folder that pops up is going to be the one with the files you need. So you could wipe them out ahead of time if you want. But even if you know what your scene's named, you'll be able to find it. Just look at your scene, what's it called, go in here, look for it in the list. So the one I've got is actually this one. So this is my render layers. This is actually the one I did last week when I was doing the glass. And you'll notice how there's two different folders, GoToMeeting, and then another one that looks like a copy with a bunch of weird numbers on it. Let me go to the first one. Okay, in here, what do we got? Data with nothing. Okay, I have images. That looks interesting. That looks hopeful. Dome light and fill light, and no key light. Wonderful. What's in here? Nothing. Nothing. Right? Like what happened? So this folder right here, this is the folder of me using the renders in the image tool. Like all the other ones, most of these are me just rendering in Maya with the image tool. The one with the numbers is the one for the batch render. Now the reason it puts the numbers on there is because it doesn't want to override the previous one you were working on, like inside of Maya. So just look for the scene name with all the weird numbers. That's the folder you want. And the numbers, by the way, are actually representing the month, date, military time, and I think there might be something else at the end. But it's basically just the timestamp on the end of it. So once you go in this folder, you're going to go into images, and there is the file we want. Oh, isn't this great? So it rendered the image. You can see it's pinwheeling. Look at the name of the file. Isn't that wonderful? Remember how inside of the comment tab, I was showing you how you could put like the little render layer name, and it was supposed to call it just rs_keylight layer? And you can see that it kind of did that. That's at the front. But then after it, it put the name of every single pass in a list. I don't know if it's my computer that's doing this, but it happens randomly. It might happen to you. I have no clue why it does that. Regardless, kind of annoying, not a big deal. Just go in there if you want, rename it, get rid of all the stuff right here. So it should be just be rs_keylightlayer.exr. Get rid of the rest, rename it, be done with it. They might fix that in the future version. I might be doing it wrong, but there's some reason why the passes keep showing up in the name. Now from here, drag the image into the Nuke's node graph. Click on it, hit the 1 key to view it. Now it's black. We saw that that's completely normal. What you want to do is go to the passes up here where it has the channels. And you'll notice all these guys should be appearing. So let me click through them. Oh, I do have a problem. So mat ID 0 is only picking up the blade. I didn't get the handle. Might need to look into that. Pulley, metal, vial. I'm not sure why that didn't work. Usually it works. Well, that's fun. I'm not going to worry about trying to troubleshoot that right now. If you see something weird like this happen, because it does happen with campus students and online students every now and then, where just like one of the mat IDs just doesn't show up. I mean, go back in Maya, just trace your steps again. Did you connect the mat ID node properly? Did you even make the attribute for the material? It might be something really obvious where you missed a step, but if you notice like you did everything right in the Maya scene and it's still not outputting it, don't worry at all. I know it happens occasionally. As long as I can tell it works in the Maya file, I'm not going to be taking off any points because this is not your fault necessarily. And so it's going to be totally fine for the grade. So I'm not really that concerned about it. We're going to go to beauty. So those all look good. Direct diffuse, specular, indirect spec, transmissive. I mean, pretty much every pass looks fine. I mean, it's very grainy because it's a super low quality render, but I know it looks like it was trying to do the right thing. Now, the only one I didn't show you quite yet is this thing called depth. This is the Z pass I picked. So I want to show you kind of what this looks like. A lot of people panic when they look at it. Here's depth. Isn't that great? So much wonderful information that we can get from this. So when you pull up depth, it's just going to look like a solid red color. This is actually correct. Yeah, so this may look wrong, but see how when I move my mouse around below the viewer, there's these little color channels popping up? Look at the red channel. It's not just red, because if it was just red, it would just be like the number 1, like everywhere. There is something there. The reason it looks so bright and red in color is because the numbers are all above 1, and anything above 1 is the same color. So the viewer can't show you it, but there is information there. Now, just in case you are curious what it looks like, there is a trick to see it. You have to darken the viewer a lot to knock those numbers down below 1. So this is an exposure slider. If you start slamming that back, you'll kind of see where it is. Like I'm way down, 0.01, and there's that depth information. It's kind of like a fog looking effect, but what this is doing is all those numbers in there, like if you see how right here in the corner it's showing me the number like 34 or so, in Maya, that point on the book is exactly 34 units from the camera. So it's almost like a measuring tool where the different parts of the scene just measure how far away that pixel is from the camera, and it gives that color or that pixel a value according to that distance. So it has like a weird looking fog effect. But that's exactly what you need to do, because later on what you can do with this thing is you can use that to defocus objects. And even though you won't have to do it, I do want to kind of show you that real quick. This is not the way you're going to do it in part 3, but I just kind of want you to see this. It's really cool. If I do this just on the beauty, see how the whole image is really blurry? If I focus this Z to focus on the right spot, it should click. Yeah, there we go. You can actually tell the camera in Nuke where you want to focus the shot. And let me crank this up a little bit. It'll put areas around it out of focus. It's really slow right now, but yeah, see how stuff in the background's blurry? And if I move the focal point from the Z to focus to the bottle, it'll click. That will pop in focus, and now the stuff towards the camera will go out of focus. It's going to be way faster when you do it. My poor computer can barely handle this right now. Oh my goodness. But a lot of people really get into this thing. And the other video for the Nuke lecture will break this down in way, way more detail. But you could use this on like a ton of projects later on where you just simply, even if you don't care about any of the other render passes, like you just want to do character animation, but you think it'd be cool to kind of put some stuff out of focus, you could just render just a straight up color image, only do the depth pass, just bring those color renders in Nuke, only do the Z to focus, and you could immediately get these really cool shots where things are kind of blurring from the camera. And you can even animate it. So the camera does a rack focus as the camera moves through the scene. You can kind of change what it's looking at. It's pretty slick. But anyway, like this does look correct. And when you know the render's fine, I mean, you could do each layer one by one if you want. Like, I'm good here, test that one, render it, look at it, test this one, look at it. But eventually when you think you are fine, you can render all three at once if you want. But the main thing is just going into settings and then putting that max samples to whatever you think you want to use. Like 256 might be pretty good. And then you just hit batch render and wait. But as a guess, it feels like most students get all the images out in about a little less than an hour. It could be cool for that, absolutely. Yeah, if you have like a fight scene where there's like the camera's right behind one of your guys, and he's in focus, and you want to do that rack focus to like kind of change and focus on the guy he's looking at down the scene, you could absolutely do that. Because I was just at a portfolio presentation, like with the campus guys, just had this big show of their work because they're at the end of the month, and I had a bunch of animators that were using that in their shots. And a couple character modelers were doing it to kind of show off different parts of the anatomy. It's pretty slick, though. So we don't have enough time to do the nuke stuff, obviously, just because we had to kind of get through the part 2. But for anyone kind of watching this video in the future, this was only the second part. Following this, once you do finish the EXR files, you just bring them all in Nuke, watch the Nuke lecture video, and that'll kind of walk you through the entire process. And I actually build it with those same images. It's your project in Nuke. Yeah, a lot of steps, a lot of small steps, but it's not difficult. It's just a process to get them all set up the right way. But it's just practice. You'll get a lot faster at it. And honestly, if we didn't have to do those alphas, this would have been like a fraction of the time. That was really the main hang-up, was just doing those little mat IDs. Okay, do you have any other questions, Megan? Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate it for showing up. Kind of glad I got this recording out. So I'm going to say we kind of call this meeting for tonight. I will save this out, post it to YouTube, and then send you guys a link either tonight or tomorrow morning. Yep, no problem. I will hopefully talk to you later.